Welcome to Save As Ability, a podcast to educate and inform you about disability employment issues. My name is David D'Arcangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Transportation access, that's our topic on today's Save As Ability. Welcome back for another episode. David D'Arcangelo with you. We continue to grow, so thank you. And if you could continue to help us out by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, that helps us keep great content flowing for you. So we're diving right into transportation access today. We got a lot to cover. Now, like many of our episodes, we're not going to get into every last detail. We're trying to keep this pithy and succinct and you engaged to really just give you a 50,000-foot view and understanding of what we're talking about here. And then we can go into particular episodes. If you want to hear that, let us know. We can go into specifics on any one of these, but let's look at it from the perspective of, if we're looking at the American Community Survey definition of people with disabilities, right? That one has around 44 million Americans as people with disabilities. Or if we're looking at the CDC version, that's a higher amount. That's like 61 million or something, right? So using the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, the BTS, which is a federal agency within the U.S. Department of Transportation. There's an organization, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. And according to them, there's approximately 25 million Americans with travel-limiting disabilities. All right. And so that's a little bit more than half of Americans with disabilities if you're using that ACS definition, which is what we're going with here. So that's kind of our starting point here to show you that this is a big issue for a lot of Americans here. And really, what does transportation brings? Well, it brings independence, self-determination, and all those good things that we've been talking about. So we're here to give you a little bit of an overview. We're going to break this down into like 3 segments, if you will, for Americans with disabilities and transportation. All right. Big picture. Your government is at work here, particularly the federal government. And this is a very long-standing thing. So this isn't political at all. We're not talking about anyone. We're not singling any administration out or party. We're not doing that. We're staying at the very big level here, big picture for people with disabilities. So really, it starts, though, with the United States Department of Transportation, or USDOT. That manages somewhere annually, they get approved congressionally, about $100 billion to fund the programs and enforce the regulations that are related for accessible travel across all of the different modes that we're going to talk about. So that's a big number. That's a number that, by the way, is contained within the larger number of hundreds of billions of dollars that is spent on transportation federally and then matched by the states and all the different programs. All right. So there's a lot at stake here. And we view that as an opportunity for people with disabilities. There's already an industry of making sure that transportation is accessible for people with disabilities. So I actually view this as a positive thing for growth, rebuilding our infrastructure, modernizing our systems here. That's a good thing. So I think on the 50,000-foot view here, the prospect for people with disabilities in transportation improvements is improving, which is a good thing. But it's a big task. You look at it, there's, somewhere like over 4 million miles of roadway in the United States. There's like over 1,000 transit stations. We have buses, light rail, commuter rail, rapid transit, trolley systems, streetcars, ferry boats. The list goes on and on. So there's a lot of different modes and methods of transportation that all need to be accessible for people with disabilities. So, and they all have their own accessibility needs. So we know, because the nature of disabilities is so diverse. There's so many, show me a million people with disabilities, I'll show you a million separate instances of how disability is personifying itself there. So, but each one of these disabilities, each one of these limitations or impairments brings different challenges to solve for in a transportation environment. So for some with mobility, we're talking about ramps and lifts and tie downs and things like that. For others with vision or hearing, we're talking about, travel planning and wayfinding and bump dots and, truncated domes and all of those things and striping. And for people with cognitive disabilities, we're talking about clear and simple wayfinding and quiet environments. And, so my point here is that one size fits all does not work. So what the challenge really for public policy for Congress and for the administration who then has to manage and administrate all this is, how do you develop large principles that apply to everybody and make sure we're being inclusive of all of our people with disabilities and all Americans, both with and without disabilities, but then really go down to the very kind of finite level of solving for each particular prevalence type and all of the different scenarios that you need for all of the different types of disabilities. That can be challenging. All right. Now, there's been a number of laws and programs that have been put in place. We're going to touch on some of them, but what I'd like you to remember is, from past episodes we've talked about, many of these laws and programs and regulations, they reference different definitions of disability, different instances of disability. And so it's not uniform. And quite frankly, some of the times that's to the benefit of people with disabilities, and some of the times it's not. And it could be modernized and really put in a better way. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's give you an example, though. Like, for instance, the ADA definition, which really focuses on that major life activity and, the substantial limitation, that can differ from the one used at Social Security insurance or, the Rehab Act or, other federal laws, other federal programs. And why is that relative? That's relative because the scope and the manner with which we're approaching providing the accessibility for these different modes of transportation, well, that matters, okay? And that's how you're going to be able to crosswalk it all back to ensure that we're putting programs in place that support this accessibility and this access. All right. So let's first talk a little bit about public transportation, public transit, and really like the roadway system in America and all of the other things around that. So there are good, solid underpinnings that exist there. And it starts with things like the ADA, Title II, Title III, the Amendments Act, and the clarifications there. That law really requires that buses, railways, subway systems accommodate riders with disabilities, okay? And this is with things like making sure the stations are accessible and there's ramps and there's priority seating and, there's announcements made, and good communication, things like that, all right? So that's in place. Additionally, Section 504, 508 of the Rehab Act, which predates the ADA, mandates that all federally funded programs be accessible and available to people with disabilities. So you can see that when many of these transportation programs were put in place, or the physical things that were built, some of them may have predated these laws. So what you had is a bunch of retrofitting. The good news is now, when new things are built, when things are modernized, the accessibility is baked in, it's built right in, and it usually leads to a better experience and more accessibility for people with disabilities and people without disabilities, by the way. We've talked about the examples of the escalator or the, automatic door opener or HP parking. All of those are good things that benefit everybody, right? So a big driver in this is another federal agency, or a federal agency rather, that is working through these federal laws that were passed. And that's the FTA, or the Federal Transit Administration. They administer programs, a couple of examples that I got out here. Section 5310, which is the enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities. 5311, which is a rural formula that provides paratransit. And we'll get into that a little later, where transit systems are, you've got to have a certain amount distance away. Everything's got to be accessible. Well, in rural areas where you don't have that, this program was put in place to try to address it. So, all right, what am I referring to there? All right, so there's a 1/4 mile rule. There's a 3/4 mile rule. The 3/4 mile rule basically says that all paratransit stations have to be have to provide complimentary paratransit within 3/4 of a mile of any fixed route or rail station. I'm reading that right out of the regulation, which is Code of Federal Regulations, Part 37, 40, Part 37. So CFR 40, Part 37. So, that's basically saying that there's got to be like a free flow. Like you can't, because what was happening was they were making the station accessible, but you couldn't get to the station. So what good was making the station accessible? That says, no, you've got to make not only the station, but the connecting points within 3/4 of a mile need to be accessible as well. Okay. So there's other local initiatives that expand coverage sometimes in certain areas that can even go to different distances or involve other modes of transportation as well. Those local FTA initiatives have been in place in certain areas. So you tend to see that more in an urban environment where there's built up transit systems, where there's, a lot of access points, a lot of different touch points. So the rules and coverage areas can vary by locality and project specifics. And this reflects the different accessibility needs of individuals, whether it's sensory, physical, cognitive, doesn't matter. They're trying to include all people with disabilities there. So there's an aspect to this that's important, and that is self-determination. That's one of our themes here at Save Visibility. And it's to ensure that all of our public transit system is accessible. So that's buses, trains, paratransit for people that the other transportation isn't appropriate for, right? So, it's really providing access to independence here. We often talk about access to opportunity, but it's really independence here and self-determination for people with disabilities. All right. So that's a big topic. We could spend a whole episode just on ground modes of transportation, everything from buses and rail and, but let's pivot a little bit and let's talk a little bit about air travel. Okay. Now there's been some work done on this recently, but air travel is still a little bit of a mixed bag depending upon the prevalence type. Now, there are laws in place. The Air Carrier Access Act, for example, prohibits airlines from discriminating against people with disabilities because of their disability. It requires accessible boarding processes and seating accommodations and in-flight services. And some of that has worked and some of that is pretty good. But if you're a person with a very significant mobility disability, some of that is really still lacking in the manner with which people are like transferred on planes and the amount of space that's allocated and, all of that. Really, there's much work to be done there. So, uh, you know, the good news is that we now have leadership in place that is very disability friendly, that with this new administration coming in, and that's a good thing, that because the Secretary of Transportation really enforces these provisions, not both for the land, but also for the air that we're just talking about here with the Air Carrier Access Act. So that's a good thing. And I think there'll be emerging technologies that will be coming online and programs that are going to benefit people with disabilities, both existing ones that are going to be strengthened, but then new technologies that'll probably come online as well. So there's actually, there's a whole initiative. It's the Accessible Transportation Technology Research Initiative, which funds advancements like indoor navigation. Those are wayfinding apps for airports and large public places, speech to text, captioning services, real-time accessibility upgrades and updates. These have all improved significantly with technology. So that's a good thing. More of that is coming online. That's a good thing. That's going to continue to improve access and transportation. There's also things that are very specific for specific prevalence types. We know that one of the largest ways to become a person with a disability is to age into disability. The data supports that. So there's been set up the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center, and that provides guidance for older adults and people with disabilities to work through these multiple travel modes. And there's, they have best practices and they have information and they've supported stuff to be able to improve that for older Americans. That's a good thing. There's what we mentioned before, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, which collects the information and, provides things like wheelchair damage rates and the availability of ASL services or, satisfaction of travelers with disabilities. A lot of the data that we're using comes from them. Okay. So modernizing air travel is going to be a process and it's going to continue to evolve. Now, the good thing is I think it's going to get better. and I think it's going to improve. The challenging thing is I think it takes time because it's very complex. You have to involve the airlines and all of the safety procedures that they have to do. You have to involve the community and what do they want to be able to hear from. You have to have all these agencies in place, and all these, some of the airports are operated on a regional basis, and there's a lot of different factors there to be able to get everybody on the same page. And so that all takes time. So the good news is I think that's coming, and I think it's improving. All right, number 3, as we move along here quickly, we're talking about highways and personal vehicles. And to me, this is the biggest opportunity. And I can see how the federal agencies like the Federal Highway Administration or, the all of the different laws that have been passed, which we'll talk about here. There was ICE-T and, the Transportation Equity Act for the 21st century, I think it was called. I think it was like ICE-T 21 or something like that. But that really requires and ensures that when these things get built, these highway projects get redone, and the highway was built 100 years ago or 70 years ago, and it's now being revamped and complete redo. It's ensuring that the ADA requirements are met. So that's things like accessible crosswalks, accessible signage, audible signals for pedestrians and visual impairments. That's a good thing. That's the modernization of America. And now we're baking the accessibility in. It's not being put in after the fact as like some type of retrofit. So really what you're seeing here is you're seeing the floor of accessibility rise in transportation. We want to keep the ceiling rising as well. Like we were just talking about with air travel, we have a ways to go there. But the good thing is with the roadways, the floor is rising in terms of the level of access. That's a good thing. Also about vehicles, think of the amount of vehicles now that are much more accessible than they used to be just a few decades ago. Now manufacturers are actually incorporating that into their designs. And, one of the organizations that oversees that is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or NHTSA. That regulates vehicle safety standards, including those that deal with wheelchair lifts, ramps, and other adaptive equipment. So people with various disabilities may need different modifications. So hand controls for people with limited mobility, or specialized seating for people with certain medical conditions, or, all of these adaptations are really improving access for people with disabilities and having a system in place to make sure that it's done uniformly and fairly and safety wise for everybody. That's a good thing. Okay. So everybody agrees on that. So really what this does is it empowers independence for people with disabilities, and it puts you on the path to prosperity, to use a little bit one of our analogies there. So many individuals with disabilities drive independently using adapted vehicles. So the existing of these compliant technologies and roadways, that's all a good thing. That's going to bring more freedom and, allow people to drive from here to all the way across the country uninterrupted. That's a good thing. So we've talked about different modes of travel, public transit, air travel, highways. There's, a couple of larger points though, takeaway as we wrap up here that I want you to have. No single approach is going to fix this. It's not going to resolve every challenge for every disability type. It's just not realistic. Instead, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that accessibility is about empowering independence and self-determination, barrier removal. Okay. We're trying to make sure that we're using technology to inform our policy and collect good data so that we can make informed decision about all of the different prevalence types of the disabilities and all of the different modes of travel and methods of travel. That's a lot. And that, it can be challenging to mix that together. The good news is I do think it's improving. We know that the numbers have come down in terms of the amount of percentage of people who used to have travel limitations to what it is now. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So that's a lot about transportation access for people with disabilities. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This came from a conversation I had with somebody who watched a previous episode. So if you want to hear a topic, let us know about it. We're there for you. Support and access to opportunities, independence and self-determination. It's David D'Arcangelo, another episode of Save Visibility. I hope you have a great day. For more information about disability employment issues, please visit our website, disabilityemploymentsolutions.com. The Save As Ability podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel at Disability Policy Expert, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribe, stream, rate, and review our shows. Your ratings and reviews help our show reach new audiences. Produced by Pod Pro Entertainment. Save As Ability lives within a network of podcasts located at podproentertainment.com. #TheNewRadio. Again, my name is David D'Arcangelo, and I'm your disability policy expert. Until next time, thank you. I hope you have a great day.